If you had 100,000 plus to spend, what would you buy? But more importantly, why would you buy it? On this edition of What's on My Desk, we're going to show you watches that are 100,000 all the way out to $1.5 million, and as to why they are so expensive. And I'm going to go through these quickly because we brought about 20 some watches that we, again, collectively picked out. And we're just going to go one by one. And basically, to make this rapid fire sort of thing, why did you pick this watch? Why is it worth that much? Fair enough?
Fair enough.
All right. I'm going to go in order, and I'm going to go here to a watch that I believe was your pick.
So pick number one, we have the Royal Oak Offshore Tourbillon chronograph in titanium with the white ceramic bezel. The unique thing about this one, as opposed to the other Royal Oak Offshore Tourbillons in its class, that you got the rose gold, the platinum one, you have the other titanium one with the black bezel, is that this one is actually limited to 15 pieces, and to me is the best looking one by far out of all of them. So this would be my first choice for something over $100,000. This has a market price nearing $200,000, between $150,000 to $200,000 depending condition. This one is in immaculate condition, full set box papers working perfectly. Great summer watch. Probably one of my favorite offshore tourbillons.
Why is it that much money?
Why it's that much money? Well, let's just say that the MSRP is near $300,000 to begin with.
So complication.
Complication,
right? It's a complicated watch. It's also limited because there's a few reasons why watches tend to cost much. Sometimes you look at a watch that's super plain, you're like, why is this $300,000? Sometimes it's rarity.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the fact that it's vintage rarity. Sometimes it's diamonds. Or
this one specifically, the movement is based on Cabinet 4, right? The original Cabinet 4. Although it doesn't have, I don't think this, actually this does have a 10-day powers or a tourbillon manual wind chronograph made in collaboration with Renault and Papy. But this is just a knockout watch. Plus the all-white look. It's not something that you get very often with AP. And whenever they do it, it's always a bang-out watch. It's just killer. And this is
to me, white ceramic, the introduction of white ceramic by AP. What was the first watch that introduced white ceramic? The 𝗵 That's right. The 𝗵 limited edition offshore, we'll pop it up on a screen, was the first time they introduced that. And after that, I think, if I'm not mistaken,
I think they went to the concept.
I think
concept. White concept.
White concept.
What you have in your
the one you have on the roof.
So this was the second.
Yep.
And then this is the third.
This came after. But funny enough, those two watches. Let's just segue into the Royal Oak concept that you have on your wrist right now.
Wasn't part of the show, but okay.
Wasn't part of the show, but we might as well talk about it. I would say of all Royal Oak Offshore, Royal Oak concepts on the market today, the white concept and that white Royal Oak Offshore tourbillon that we get seem to be the fan favorites, simply because of how unique they are, how sporty they look, especially in white. So pin them up against each other.
I mean, this is just a beautiful combination. Yeah, well, if we're talking white ceramic, let's go right to a Richard Mille, which surprise was also Adrian's pick. Yeah. What do you got?
Surprise. So we have the Richard Mille RM30, also known as the White Rush. I mean, look, I've always been a big fan of Richard Mille. Everybody knows that. And my favorite things about Richard Mille are the components that they use when they're making their watches, their NTPTs and their ceramics, especially white ceramic. You have the RM30 here. You have the white bubble, for example. And me and Marco were actually going back and forth to see when we got this in, which one we actually prefer, the RM55 bubble or the RM30.
I'm going with this because it's slightly bigger.
Well, it's also much rarer, right? This is limited 50 pieces versus a bubble, which is regular.
Okay, how much is
that was the main argument.
So this is $350,000.
And why is it $350,000 mainly? Because it's definitely not from a horological perspective. This is not a complicated watch.
Correct. Yeah, no, I think it's time only. It's got a function selector. It's got a power reserve. But otherwise, I mean, there's variable rotor geometry.
Speaking of Renault and Papy function selector, right? Yeah. Renault and Papy literally has a finger in everything. So to me, I'm gonna put this down as hype, the most hype watch out on the market, or brand, I should say, when in terms of hype, because a lot of people say, well, it's Rolex, and it's really not, because Rolex is the most popular, but I think there's a big difference between most popular versus...
But it's also limited availability, right? Because Rolex probably has more hype than Richard Mille, but...
Not hype, popularity.
Popularity, yes, popularity than Richard Mille, but Richard Mille has far less supply versus something like Rolex, right? So that also plays into this.
I'm gonna throw you guys off by going from something that's super known to something you guys probably wouldn't even know what it is if I put it in front of you. Seemingly what looks like just a plain Jane Panerai radio mirror, and I'm gonna pass this off to Marco because this is his pick.
This is the first time I've seen this in person. This is a really special watch. I mean, it's super limited edition. This was after the acquisition of Richemont or Vendôme at the time, right? So the Panerai segments are kind of divided in two segments. There's a pre-Vendôme, which is I want to say 96, and then post-Vendôme. This would have been just after the acquisition, and what they did was a few special edition with new old stock movements, essentially. And this one has actually a 𝗕𝗏𝗬 movement, which is branded by Rolex, right? That's what Rolex would have used back in the 1930s when Panerai was making these for the Italian military. This is also platinum case, I think super limited, like I think maybe 50 pieces at most. But this watch is super special. It's like the ultimate, if you know, Panaristi watch.
So why is this watch $150,000?
I mean,
Does it have anything to do with Stallone?
Yes, that definitely plays into it, right? The whole Panaristi craze. But I think it mainly has to do, one, it's a platinum watch. Two, it also plays into the history, right? The fact that it has a Rolex branded movement in a Panerai case, it plays into that whole Panerai history and DNA. Them being, Rolex pocket watches that were converted into wristwatches. So yeah.
So we're going to say collectability and rarity and inavailability.
And history.
Because there's certainly no flex here. There's certainly no hype here.
Yeah.
This is for a die-hard collector, and collectability is the first word that comes to mind.
No doubt. I mean, you said it best, right? At the onset, it looks like just another Panerai.
Yeah, it looks like a $5,000 ring game here.
Pretty much.
I'm going to go to a watch that I pick, and I have to go to one of my idols in the industry, and that is Max Büsser. I have to go to MB&F. And we talked about collectible watches. This is the horological machine one. This is the first horological machine made by MB&F, and this is known as the turntables. Some call it a pair of breasts. Some call it an S. There's been a lot of names for this watch because you look at this thing and the first words that come to your mind is, what in the hell is this, right?
Yeah.
And that was really the shock factor behind every horological machine from Max Büsser. And we have another one in here. I might as well talk about both of them at the same time. This is the HM6, so 5 watches later. Why is this watch $100,000? Well, for one, this is a tourbillon. Two, as of late, independents have been picking up steam in regards to popularity, in regards to pricing. And the reason is people are finally starting to recognize that, A, there's a market here. This is the future collectibles 20, 30, 40 years from when it comes to independents, right? Or the leading independents, I should say. HM1 is the first, and we talked about this numerous times. I always said, hey, if you're going to buy something to put away for quite a long time, go with the first, go with the last, whether it comes to the model, whether it comes to the actual watch. And I don't think it gets any more iconic or collectible when it comes to, if you're a true fan of
First editions.
independents, I also, MB&F in this case, having the first horological machine and having the first legacy machine, LM1 and HM1 would be the way to go. So obviously it's part complication, it's part collectability, small part collectability, because you get that collector's market is not that big.
I mean, we've spoken about this before, right? I think today Max Büsser is the modern day Gerald Genta, right? Or he's the modern equivalent to, a real iconic design maker, somebody who is probably going to be underappreciated for his time. And who knows if there will be another? I doubt that there will be, right? Unfortunately, when you have a genius, a creative genius like Max Büsser creating machines like this, they tend to go underappreciated. And I mean, listen, it goes back to those sleeper picks. These have climbed up in price tremendously, especially with this.
Listen, 10 years ago, and anybody would bring me an MB&F, I was paying 25 cents on a dollar, 20 cents on a dollar, 30 cents. And it's not because the watch wasn't worth it. When we pay for something, when we buy something, and Adrian can attest to this as the head buyer here, we don't pay based on, hey, I think this watch is worth $1 million. We pay based on what the market is to allow us to make our margin in between. At the time we're going to resell it based on the amount of time it's going to take us to sell it. And because the independent market in general was so small, it is still very small in comparison to the big boys. This is where the difference between the buy and the sell comes in. But once they get more and more into the spotlight and people understand what a marvel these machines are. I mean, this HM6 is a knockout.
This has become a traded market, right? MB&F, FP Journe, these have become traded markets, right? Even though their supply is still limited, you can clue in somewhat on what the market price is at any given time.
I think it's also important to point out when you're looking at brands like MB&F, to the person who is a Rolex wearer or even a Patek buyer, they look at a watch like an MB&F or an Ur-Work or the likes of WT and they're like, that thing is massive. How can somebody actually wear that? Well, let me just say, this specific one, right, it looks very massive and it is massive on the wrist in comparison to your typical Rolex, right? But I've gotten wrist time with these watches, and believe it or not, the way the case is engineered, it's actually quite comfortable. Ergonomics are a big part of the design, absolutely. Because when you're looking at something like this, it looks like...
how's that wearable, right?
How's that wearable? But it is. So I think that's very important to point out. And if you've never picked up anything like that, I strongly encourage you to.
I'm going to go to a Roman watch, right? Maybe this is nostalgia. Maybe this is something else. Ulysse Nardin, a brand that as of late doesn't get a whole lot of love. Yeah. But at the time I was starting out, it was getting all the love. It was one of the most popular brands of watches that I was selling, mainly due to the increase of demand in the former Soviet Union markets, right? What I went with the Genghis Khan. Now, this is a watch that originally retailed for $680,000. Why is this watch for $680,000? Why? It's pretty simple to see. This is a minute repeater, this is a tourbillon, and this is a mechanical tourbillon where you have a mechanical scene that goes live on the screen as soon as you do press the minute repeater, depicting the scene of Genghis Khan and a fight.
Pretty quite impressive, actually.
It is a very, very impressive mechanically watch. So as to why this watch, now this watch doesn't trade, in its high times, this watch was trading around list price. You could barely get 10% off on this. And again, they made it an edition of only 30 pieces. And it wasn't because, oh my God, they only decided to make 30. First of all, not an easy watch to make.
Yeah.
Second of all, not a lot of guys out there dropping 700,000 Swiss francs on a watch, right? It's still a limited market within our market. And last but not least, if you're going to create something like this and have someone spend that kind of money on a watch, give them a sense of exclusivity to where you're only one of 30 people in the world, that's damn near 8 billion that has one of these watches. So the reason this thing is that much money, the current market price on these is around 250,000, obviously, due to the fact that I think Nardin dropped off. We had a couple of years ago them sort of going a cheaper route, cheapening the brand by going lower priced items, by literally lowering their retails because they realized that they want to pick up a market. They wanted to pick up on that Rolex market by making watches $20,000 and under. And I think they've done a good job, and I think these things will have their comeback. But at the end of the day, the Genghis Khan Ulysse Nardin is one of the most iconic watches, one of the most complicated watches I've held in my hand, and therefore this is why this is as much as it is.
It combines artisanal watchmaking, right, with art, literal art, because these are sculpted statues made by hand. And to have like that complication where on demand you can strike the minute repeater and have like kind of figurines moving, it's pretty incredible.
Considering there's no battery, I'm going to go to Marco. This was kind of a choice between me and Marco, both the same, because this is a watch. We talked about this watch before, the Cabinet 5 from Audemars Piguet, and this is a watch that a horological geek will geek out over and over due to its horological complication.
Yeah, watch like this is, first of all, in terms of complication, we're talking about a platinum perpetual calendar chronograph, but what makes this really special is the escapement. Now this is part of the Cabinet series. For those who don't know, Cabinet series being, there were supposed to be 8 cabinets, they only made 5.
I heard it was supposed to be 20.
Okay, 20, let's say. They've only made 5. This was the last one they made. They never completed the set. They never even completed 20 of these, if I'm not mistaken, right? In some cases, even they never completed all of the cabinets in 1, 2, 3, or 4. So these are extremely rare, pretty much the rarest of the rare. And what this features is a Robin escapement. Now, this is one of a kind lubricantless escapement. And for those who don't know, essentially all watches require lubrication, right, for them to work. And in order for them to work, they need that lubrication. It's like oil in a car, right? Essentially, same kind of idea. Now, to have something that requires no lubrication has never been done in the industry before, right? To be the first to do it in an industry that is.
Who was the second to do it?
The second to do, actually, there was a couple. There's one Robin escapement, as far as I know. They did this. They did also a millenary, just a regular edition, but I don't know who's the second to do it. I only know of AP.
Extreme Lab Jaeger-LeCoultre.
Oh yeah, sure, the Extreme Lab JLC.
The movement that has no oil in it.
It's true. Now this watch, again, Robin escapement, the fact that it's ultra accurate, 7-day power reserve, perpetual calendar chronograph movement, it's in a millenary case, and so you're going to get complication, you're going to get horological pedigree, but you're going to get insane discount because unfortunately millenary case is super underrated.
Had that watch been done in a Royal Oak case, I believe it would be a lot more. Right now this watch is trading around that $150,000, $160,000 price range.
It's a shame of timing period, right? If this was released today, I think it would be far more popular. You look at the code line. The code line may be aesthetically.
If they release it in a code line, the problem is that to fit all that real estate into a code case.
Correct.
Is
difficult.
Could be quite problematic.
But
this was also done right after the debut of the MC12, which is really, really well. When the MC12 first came out, original retail on the watch was around 202,000. That watch sold upwards of 275,000. It was around the time where the hype was on all the limited edition offshores and AP in general. There was a big hype going around AP. This is when it all started. And they piggybacked off of the MC12, assuming they're going to do just as well. And they did when they first came out. But then slowly but surely, people dubbed the millenary case to be the dog case and went to Royal Oaks and Royal Oaks Offshore, and this suffered that fate.
I beg to differ. I think the Ēďuard-Piguet case was.
Edward
But
Piguet.
𝗴𝗿𝗲 was on its way out around that time anyway, so it didn't really matter.
But the point is, this never got to catch kind of the hype wave of the Royal Oak, right? It was pretty much discontinued before all of that, and so it never got the love from AP collectors.
Recognizability factor.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to Adrian again with picks. Because,
Let's go top left. We'll take the. I'm going to start with this one, and then we're going to go into the Tiger Eye Daytona. So here we have a 5916 stainless steel, and I remember when this watch first came out, and we actually had a few of them, but little did I know that they were going to be manufactured for, I believe,
1 year.
this is the black.
This
the black
is one-
less than a year.
The black, that's what I'm talking. We have the black one, Roman, not the white one.
Black is 1 year
Anyway,
production.
so it was released, little did we know that it was going to be released for a year, maybe a little bit less. Therefore, I wish we held all the ones that we had.
Yeah, the
before,
ones that were
because
trading around
it's-
$28,000,
because
$30,000.
if you need to go find this on the market, you can't. So this is one of those, what I like to call hidden gems, right? And I believe that it's an undervalued piece because, look, you have a Patek Philippe that has more complications than your average Nautilus that trades for almost half the value. Now, the black one, not so much because of how rare it is, but I think that this is something that is often overlooked and is a great piece to have in the collection.
So the reason the 5960, to sum it up, the reason the 5960 specifically the black dial trades at $100,000+ is because of the black dial, because they made so little of them. And anything from a major brand that's collectible, i.e. Patek, Rolex, etc., is going to be that low production numbers, and this is the reason why, because it's not really due to the fact that this is an annual calendar chrono automatic, which is pretty big to do.
And a flyback.
But if you look at, and a flyback chrono at that, if you go look at the white dial, it trades significantly less because they made those for 6 years. So this is really production. Oh, do you see that? Yeah. This is really, small production numbers is the reason behind the price. Let's jump into something different. Let's jump into some bling, right?
Yeah. So
let's talk about the Tiger Eye.
So now to talk about the Rolex Daytona, and we have extensively talked about this in the video we did together, which actually did very well. We have the yellow gold Tiger Eye here. Now the one we have here is actually the latest release from that series. First you had the Oyster Flex, then you had the one with the pave band, and now you have the regular one.
You sort of tone it down.
Yeah, they tone it down. It's a super, super clean watch. Every single time I get it, I zone in and focus in on the dial and how intricate it is and how beautiful the stones are set. This is a watch that you pretty much damn near cannot buy at the AD if you try.
What's the list on this?
I don't even know.
It's irrelevant.
It's over 100,000, but the market price is over is 2.5, about 2.5x.
Yeah, so we're talking about $250,000 market price on a watch like this. And why is it so expensive? We talked about this numerous times, so there's no need to dwell on it. But look, anything that's encrusted with or gem set from Daytona is made in very, very low numbers. It's no secret. When something is made in low numbers, it's something that is going to be uber collectible. Any gem set, anything, any special dial Rolex, anything that's out there, beach Daytonas, certain meteorite pieces, rainbows, and so on and so forth, they trade through the roof because those are the collectibles. Those are the ones that will fetch those numbers.
I think you made also an astute point, Adrian, is that this is one of the only one, like you can, you've seen aftermarket rainbows, but you've never seen an aftermarket Tiger. They cannot replicate that.
Basically, to replicate any gem set piece or any Rolex piece or any piece for that matter, you could do it with Nautilus, you could do it with Richard Mille, you can manufacture and remanufacture cases and make it bust down, as we like to call it, on the gray market.
I've yet to see a bust down of that.
The Tiger Eye, it's going to be damn near impossible to replicate that.
Well, if we're talking about diamond pieces, let's go to one of the ultimate diamond pieces from Audemars Piguet. I should say the latest. I've had my fair share with high jewelry pieces or high jewelry. How do you say that in French?
Joaillerie.
Yeah, what he said. High jewelry pieces with Audemars Piguet. Now, me and you, we've seen Grand Comps that were all iced out factory. We've seen Baguette Offshore. I think the Baguette Offshore Chrono all iced out. I think when they did this, they basically took their, I'll call it the Baguette line, right? Because anytime they make a baguette piece, it drives the price through the roof in terms of retail. This watch retails for 1.6 million Swiss francs, right? They did a double bounce. Right? Arguably, probably a grail, without the diamonds, a grail piece for most AP collectors out there.
The double balance is the alpha of the Royal Oak line.
Now, let's not discount the horology aspect of this. It's pretty obvious why this is $1.6 million. I mean, look at it, right? But the double bounce, quickly talk about that.
Yeah, so the original was a 15305. First of all, for those who don't know, there's a great story. So Francois at the time allowed his watchmakers essentially to create whatever they wanted, and he saw somebody had a Royal Oak, or one of the watchmakers at AP had a Royal Oak with a skeletonized dial, and he loved it so much that he said, I want to remake this. And that gave birth to the 15305, which was the original iteration. But they found by adding a double balance, essentially what you would have is 30% increase in accuracy. And so this made this watch far more accurate. And it goes back to this idea, right? The Royal Oak is a great blank canvas, and people underrate Audemars Piguet's watchmaking because it is definitely there.
But again, the fact they make so very few of these. I think if there's a total of 5 of these out there, I'd be pleasantly surprised. And look, companies tend to flex their muscles not just horologically, but also from a jewelry perspective. And
𝗕𝗏𝗬.
Yeah, what he said. So for me, I like diamond pieces. I've said it before. And to me, if you're going to put on a real chandelier,
Yeah, it's a chandelier.
Unfortunately, in the setting that we have right now with the lighting, it does not do the watch justice when it's hitting the right light.
I'm going to move on to something that's kind of a combination. And this is a perfect example to say, well, why is this watch so expensive? Well, it's the limited production, it's the high horology, and it's also the diamonds, the baguette bezels. I'm going to let Marco take away on this guy because I know this is one of your favorite pieces that we have.
Yeah, I absolutely love this watch. First of all, the depth and movement architecture of this is phenomenal. It's an Omega DeVille tourbillon. It's also skeleton platinum with a baguette bezel. The watch itself, so for those who don't know, right, Breguet obviously invented the tourbillon in 1801, but the first brand to actually feature a tourbillon in a wristwatch is Omega. So this actually kind of goes back to the Omega history, which is cool. They have those kind of floating hands, almost reminiscent of, like, you know, the old Star.
Central tourbillon.
Yeah,
let's
central turb, which also shows the seconds, which is really cool. And the watch is limited to 10 pieces, the only one Roman has ever seen. So to ever handle a watch that somebody who's been doing this as long as he has only seen once before is pretty special. And this watch is just spectacular from a watchmaking perspective, from a movement architecture, and finishing perspective, because this is entirely handmade and hand finished. It's absolutely beautiful.
So this thing covers all three. It covers rarity, it covers collectability, it covers horology, and again, supply and demand, right? I've seen these in its plain version, i.e. without the diamond baguette bezel, but based on the movement finishes and the skeleton throughout, adding these baguette bezels on, adding these baguettes onto the bezel adds so much to this watch. It just overall gives it an insane look.
Now let's finish off with the last diamond piece we have here, which is the ladies RM7 and NTPT baguette set. So this is a watch here that's actually something that RM has just started doing over the past couple years. You know, they integrated diamonds into all of their metals, from white gold to rose gold, titanium as well. And then they figured out, hey, why don't we try to do this in an NTPT form? They actually did something that nobody's ever done before. Put diamonds. Nobody's done it in ceramic before. Nobody has done it in NTPT carbon before. And RM's like, hey, well, why don't we just take an already existing extremely high retail price, and let's just make it really, really, really ridiculously high and see if it sells. Well, let me tell you something. Every single time one of these hits the boutiques, it's picked up right away.
It's a beautiful watch. The RM7 for ladies from Richard Mille is the wearable one, because the 37s I feel a bit too big for most ladies, or at least they look ridiculously big unless they don't mind wearing it that way. The 7s have always flown off the shelves for us from the time when they were discounted to the time when they're trading over list. I'm going to jump to another watch that is basically in line with, I guess, the mega tourbillon that we show, and that's the 25th anniversary Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. Now, this particular watch is the guy that winds from the back. You notice there's no crown on this watch, and this is just it. It's the rarity, right? They made 25 pieces. They made it for the 25th anniversary of the Royal Oak, and this has both rarity, collectability, as well as horology, because this is still a high horology watch, i.e. being a tourbillon. And then I'm going to contrast this, and again, this is a watch that trades for around $350,000. I'm going to contrast this with a watch that trades for $250,000, seemingly yet another plain Jane Royal Oak, but it's not just any Royal Oak. This is the 5402, i.e. the original Royal Oak that Gerald Genta designed in white gold. So this is the 5402 BC with a diamond dial, with the diamond markers are actually kind of subtle, if you ask me.
Oh, it's such a pretty touch.
They did that because, again, this was a watch that made a lot less of, because when they came out with the stainless steel one, the 5402, everybody's like, what?
I'd love
this much for a stainless steel watch?
Now just like thinking about it, you know, Rolex has been doing it, Patek has been doing it. Why doesn't AP bring back diamond markers in a Royal Oak?
I don't know. One of my favorite modern Royal Oaks, to be fair, like Marco says, is the Tuxedo. till this day, I absolutely love the tuxedo.
Right, but
Royal
that's
Oak.
not a subtle. That's not a subtle.
I think they do it. I've seen like the ice blue with baguette indices, but they don't do like round diamonds like this anymore. No. I forget the reference of it, but I will pop it up on the screen. It's like an ice blue dial with baguette indices as the hour markers.
But that's a ladies' piece. Yeah, that's
no, I'm pretty sure it's a men's piece. It's a modern size piece.
I can't think of one.
Well, we'll pop it up on the screen.
Guys, think about it. I'll finish off with this. When 𝗕𝗏 designed the Royal Oak, the 5402 and AP came out with their first sports luxury watch in stainless steel, people were screaming, saying, "What the hell am I getting for the money?" Because the type of price tag that the watch came out, people were expecting a gold watch. So they quickly did these things in yellow gold. They did it in a two-tone, and they also did it in a white gold with diamond markers to sort of justify the price. Case in point, there were a lot less of these made. For anybody that collects original Royal Oaks, I know a lot of clients of mine, they do tend to collect Royal Oaks. I know some guys that have over 300 Royal Oaks. And where do they usually start? They start with the 5402s, stainless steel. Some will go 5402 A series, B series, C series, even D series, right? And most will covet this because this is one of those that's impossible to find, and that's what this is with this. It's the rarity, it's the collectability, it's the heritage, it's the pedigree, if you will, and it's just simple fact that just not a lot of these out there, and those that get them, they won't resell them.
And it's also replacement cost. A watch like this, first of all, it's super clean. Second of all, it's full set, original box, original papers, archives from AP.
Most of them you find, they'll be beat up, and that's a problem. But again, I know collectors out there that would just get their hands on any 5402.
Yeah, but that's the idea, right? Replacement cost of such a clean unit, that is full set, is so high because they made so few of these. And I mean, go back to 1972, people didn't really keep
so pretty
buying.
with these diamond indices, man.
I'm going to jump.
AP, if you're listening, for your next AP release, because I know you guys like to do a lot in the Royal Oak line, especially men's, bring back diamond indices.
I'm going to jump forward a little bit to the Royal Oak chronograph Tourbillon from Audemars Piguet, a manual wine. This came out around the time where bigger was better. Most people will confuse it for an ultra because it was 45 millimeter size. This is actually the Royal Oak 9. It's a bit thinner. And again, with these, and this tray is around 120,000. This particular one with the brown dial is just a lot rarer than its predecessor, the one they made with the black dial. This is just a variation of, I think potentially they wanted to do this in all color dials, like with the offshores, the yellow, the green, and so on and so forth, but they did not. This watch didn't take off too well. It took off at the time. This was a great watch to buy because at the time that this watch came out, there was really not a whole lot of options for Royal Oak Tourbillons. This was the first one that they made, right? In the size that was due to the times, unlike this particular guy, right? And for them, this was their way to say, hey, here's a bigger watch, here's a tourbillon, because back then, a tourbillon was a bigger flex. The tourbillon complication was the complication, that was the flex complication. If anybody who's anybody, if you had a tourbillon on your wrist, that was the flex. Today it's like a richer meal, right? That's time only. Today it could be, a diamond watch, right? But back then a tourbillon was the flex to have. So the reason this thing trades around that $100,000 price range is again because of its complication. When the watch originally came out, the original list price was $253,800. I don't know how I remember that.
I mean, even just from a value perspective, you're getting a manual wine chronograph with a tourbillon from a Holy Trinity brand for around the 100,000 or so price range, made by 𝗏𝗏, by the way. And you compare that, even for example, we have the ceramic offshore, right? Obviously, that's a slightly different watch, a little bit more limited. This is one of 20 pieces, but same complications, right? This one I think is an automatic, and this is almost like 300,000, right? So triple the price. Oh, it's a manual wine, so it might even share a similar movement. So yeah, I mean, again, right, you're talking about insane value in that one, but this is obviously...
one of the things that people fail to realize is that a lot of watch dealers, especially a lot of the newer watch dealers, in their mind is, oh, wait a minute, that's a tourbillon, that's this. At the end of the day, there's one little factor, and that's a human factor. And again, one of the arguments I put forth in regards to creating market graphs for watches and showing them as investments and so on and so forth. There's one thing that you have to take into consideration, that is trends, right? This is much newer, this is much fresher use of materials. Ceramic, the blue strap, it's a skeleton watch, it's just a better looking watch. And this already starts to look a bit old, where this looks to be up with the latest and greatest trends. This is more of a head turner than this today versus when this came. When this first came out, this was a big head turner. It was a big Audemars Piguet that was a tourbillon. Unmistakably, you can see the tourbillon at 6 o'clock. Here, you have to look close to make sure there's a tourbillon, because it's a skeleton. The tourbillon is not as big of a flex today. Horological flexes are not as big as they were when I first started out in the industry. Right now, it's about the overall look. It's about the fact that this is an Audemars, the fact that it's a skeleton. The fact that this watch is a skeleton is a bigger flex than it is a tourbillon chrono, which is a shame. And people don't get it, right? But I think the reason, this is how much now?
This is 275,000.
So at 275,000, the reason this watch is that much is number one, A, yes, it's still complicated, so horology is part of it. B, it's extremely, extremely rare. There are only 20 of them. They're only made for the Japanese boutique.
Correct.
And last but not least, it's popular. People want it, supply and demand.
Ceramic AP period is popular.
Ceramic AP is very popular, so why don't we just segue that into the granddaddy offshore.
Into the granddaddy of all offshores.
Speaking of ceramic AP.
And speaking of ceramic, here's a ceramic.
Wait, hold my beer.
Here's a ceramic Audemars Piguet Grand Complications. We're talking about a full perpetual calendar split second chronograph minute repeater automatic. That's a mouthful, and believe me when I tell you, this is certainly a whole lot of complications to cram into a watch. And I can only think of a few brands that I would legitimately say that the horology matches the name, i.e. Audemars Piguet, i.e. Patek Philippe, not Rolex for certain, right? There's only a Vacheron, right? There's not a whole lot of companies out there that have made Grand Complications. And oddly enough, Patek tends to call their Grand Complication line starting with an annual calendar, which I completely disagree with. But IWC Grand Comps, right? And this is something that I won't even put into that category because they've known to be problematic. But Vacheron, AP, Patek Philippe, and we'll get to one of those in a minute as well. To me, this is the ultimate flex on it checks every bullet point for me. Horology, history, name, hype, overall look, exclusivity, use of materials. This thing checks all the buttons, but it also costs $750,000. So for obvious.
Oh, 3/4, not 1/4, 3/4.
$750,000 of it. 750.
I didn't have my coffee today. You know what my favorite thing about this watch is? Forget about all the mechanics, forget about all the engineering, is when this watch was first released, we used to get a lot of inquiries for them, and we could never, ever, 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 ever find it. So to finally have it is like, it feels like I went on a treasure hunt and finally got it.
It's one of those things, and I've said it numerous times before, because I have dealers, younger dealers that will always come up and say, how do you find a client to, for $1 million watch, $100,000? In order to have, I always made it simple. My whole quote to everybody always has been, to sell big shit, you have to have big shit, and you have to have the balls to buy it. And that's just the bottom line, right? Unless you have it, you can't sell it. Trying to flip a watch like this, I've tried it numerous times in my younger career.
Very rare it happens.
It's very rarely that you're able to make a deal happen that's in that price range if you don't actually physically own the watch.
I will say this also. A watch like this showcases, again, one of the most astute points ever made. Any watch take is Adrian saying the Royal Oak is the greatest blank canvas. I think that shows it right there. I mean, that's just insane to combine all those complications. And it looks good. It's just a great looking watch.
I'm going to go a little in between to something older and newer, right? I am going to go to the lap timer from Audemars Piguet, and I'm going to go to the first automatic concept chronograph skeleton from Audemars Piguet. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, well, obviously the reason these are expensive, I mean, the lap timer trades around just under $200,000. This trades around $250,000, right? Obviously, it's the complication. This, in my opinion, is one of the best chronographs ever made. Without getting into.
It's the only one that's better is the Evo Perpetual the Evo chronograph made by MB&F. It's the only one. I mean, but they're very competitive. I think those are the top two king chronographs ever made in terms of
we haven't had hands-on with the new chronograph from MB&F. Max, if you're listening, maybe you want to send one down for us to play with? Well, actually, to be fair, we did at Watch Time for a minute, but we didn't really get to play with it because there was a line of people wanted to handle and touch that watch. And anyway, the first automatic concept, again, it's a big feat because, again, big watch, big movements, and to make it an automatic was a big feat. Skeletonize it, make it look just unbelievably aesthetically. But I'll go out on a limb and I'll talk about all concept, the one I'm wearing, this one, and this one. I think the Audemars Piguet concept is a timeless design. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Well, it's timeless science, ahead of its time.
Yeah.
It's timeless, meaning that this is much older than this. This is much older than this and this, and yet somehow,
more or less. I mean,
every time. I mean, listen. The last year or 2 years ago, they decided to finally tone it down in terms of size. I know this watch looks ridiculous on me, but I don't care. My favorite complication from Audemars Piguet, my favorite complicated watch from Audemars Piguet is the concept. I choose the Alaprey concept because, again, it's the original. We don't have one here, unfortunately. Every time we get one in, it sells. I kind of get sad. I'm going to move on to a couple of heavy-duty pieces. I'm going to start with something a bit lower. I know this is a Marco pig, and yes, it is an F. Bijourne, and I think the reason this is expensive, this trades around $140,000, $150,000, is obviously the hype on the market. This is the one independent that helped all other independents out there.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
It brought up all the other, like I've always said, like, hey, you have this one model from Rolex that all of a sudden starts going through the roof, right? It'll bring up its two-tone predecessor. It'll bring up another version, and then eventually brings up the whole brand. And 𝗵𝗔𝗄, I think, is solely responsible for shining the spotlight on other independent watchmakers and bringing them up in market value and just knowledge, making people aware. Now, what we have here is the 𝗕𝗏 𝗬𝗓𝗓. I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, 𝗕𝗏𝗓𝗓𝗓, which is one of my favorite watches. One of my favorite watches from 𝗵𝗔𝗄 is the annual calendar. One of the only calendar complications apart from the Grand Comp that 𝗵𝗔𝗄 made. And this is now discontinued. He doesn't even make this anymore. So it's actually a super rare watch, rare in terms of production, right? Because since its inception, I think 𝗵𝗔𝗄 has only made 20,000 watches total. So, I mean, to have one of these in hand in such great condition was recently serviced by 𝗵𝗔𝗄. I mean, it's just a great looking watch. It's unlike any other calendar wristwatch ever made. The look to it is so distinctly 𝗵𝗔𝗄. And the movement itself, I mean, we've talked about this time and time again. First of all, rose gold movement, which I think is absolutely, is such a great touch. And then 5-day power reserve is the official listing, closer to 7 days, the actual watch because of the drop off in amplitude. But the watch itself is a horological marvel, 𝗵𝗔𝗄 being one of the better watchmakers, if not the greatest watchmaker of this generation.
The only issue with 𝗕𝗏, I don't think he's moved and you want to take over the business, and the jury is still out as to what's going to happen.
But I think 𝗕𝗏 has also crossed a realm where I don't really see him as an independent watchmaker anymore. Right? He's kind of transcended that independent niche realm. He's more out there, right?
He's a brand now.
Exactly. He's a brand. Yeah, he's a staple brand. Yeah. He's going to be around. Even though there isn't that next person to take over the brand, they have that big name recognition.
Anytime you get an indie, and this happens with the likes of Richard Mille, where it's a watch that at one point for the longest time was trading under MSRP. The moment it surpasses that mark and it's over MSRP, the man at the helm can now step down because now you have a brand.
Yep.
The man at this helm can't step down because the man at the helm is the one that makes them.
Yeah, I understand, but what I'm saying is that at this point, his name is forever.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to see these resonances trading for what they were trading for 3, 4, 5 years ago. I don't think ever again.
I remember people bringing me bronze movement 𝗕𝗏s, and I would be paying $15,000 to $20,000.
Well, how much were you paying for RM30s and RM11s and RM10s and RM5s for the longest time?
We used to get them at 45.
That's all it is.
Let's escalate this a little bit, and I'm going to escalate within the 𝗕𝗏 world, and I'm going to show you guys the black label vertical tourbillon from 𝗵𝗔𝗄.
Ultimate modern 𝗕𝗏.
So again, the reasoning this is expensive, it's discontinued, overall hype on 𝗕𝗏, overall market on 𝗕𝗏. But the reason something like this is to the tune of $450,000 because you simply, if you think you can't get that, or you think you can't get any current production 𝗕𝗏, this, forget about it. You have to be part of the inner circle, i.e. you'd have to have breakfast with Mr. 𝗕𝗏 every morning in order to get one of these. Anything black label, 2 black label pieces per boutique.
Per year.
Right? And this isn't
per
of each model.
Yeah.
No, it's not of each model. It's 2 black label pieces, not per model.
Okay.
So go out there and find the vertical. Let's talk about the geeky part of this.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been 3 generations. There's the T, the TN, and then there's this one, which is the vertical turb. There's a couple of different nuances. One, the case is a little bit bigger. This actually wears much bigger than the TN and the previous original models with the brass movement. This one also has the vertical turb, which went from a 60-second tourbillon now to 30-second tourbillon, inclined vertically. And the reason he did that was because Well,
you can do this.
Exactly. So when you actually put it down on a desk clock or on your nightstand, when you take the watch off, the tourbillon actually functions and does its role, right? And on wrist, a tourbillon necessarily doesn't have a purpose because your wrist is kind of in constant motion. But this actually does allow the tourbillon to perform.
It does almost quadruple your chances of the watch, of adjusting that mainspring to be more accurate, because even as you're wearing the watch and going every which way, being this quote-unquote a 2D tourbillon, let's just call it that, it does give you a better chance of your watch being a lot more accurate as you even wearing it, rather than, I think the original idea said is that you can, if you have the deploying buckle on the watch, you can lay the watch on its side, on its case, or if you have a regular tank buckle on the watch, you can just lay it down flat and the tourbillon will keep on functioning. I'm going to escalate this for one last time. This was my pick, and
now King of Kings.
From the King of Kings, we're talking about the Patek Philippe, the 5208R Grand Complication. Again, this is a minute repeater, split-second chronograph, automatic from Patek Philippe. And when it comes to, this is what I call grand complication from Patek, right? Not the annual calendars. Now, unless you're giving me a minute repeater, unless you're giving me a tourbillon, I'm not giving you the name of grand complication. And you know what? The reason this thing is $1.4 million is because of a few things. Number one, to get one of these, what do you need to do? You need to have a humongous history of buying Pateks from Patek. You need to be on the books. Hey, Mr. Sharf has purchased $5 million worth of Pateks from Patek Philippe over the last 10 years. I'm going to allow him to submit an application. That's right, an application. This is an application. This is the most ridiculous thing in our industry. When I first got into the industry, this existed with Patek. I can't think of any other brand that this existed with at the time 20 years ago but Patek. I'm going to, and this is when I first started. I was a young kid, and I'm like, I'm like, wait a minute. I want to spend $1 million. I gotta go interview. I gotta go through an approval process. I gotta sit down with the Patek family for dinner to have a little interview as to what, as if they will allow me to spend $1 million plus. That was the most ridiculous thing to me.
Makes you want to spend it even more.
It makes you want to spend it even more. And again, it's an application piece, i.e. you're not walking into Patek Philippe or a Patek dealer and saying, oh, let me get a 5208 or a Skyline Tourbillon or Grandmaster Chime. None of that stuff is ever going to make it onto your wrist unless you have purchase history, unless you're approved by the company and by the family themselves, really, is what it comes down to. I mean, they do fly you out to Switzerland, and I think they actually even buy you a ticket, give you a tour of the factory, and then they sit down and they interview you.
Or you could just forego that whole process and contact us at www.luxurybazaar.com and buy it direct.
This is the reason why these things. I think the original list price on this watch is around $1 million Swiss, or 980,000, something like that.
Today, yeah.
Actually, no, it's more. It's 1.1 now. I think they raised the retail prices on these. But in either case, you're paying 20 to 30% over list on any application piece, and in some cases, you're paying 5x, like the Grandmaster Chimes, the Skyline Tourbillons, and things of that nature. And this is the biggest reason behind, and this is why everybody still says that Patek is king, because they're able to produce such high, complicated watches. Never mind the list price on this, right? The list price is quite high for what it is. If you break it down, if you have, think about an IWC Grand Comp, a couple of $100,000, $280,000, right?
I mean, even just the AP Grand Comp.
The AP Grand Comp, I think the original list price on that is somewhere around where it sells a little less, right? Mm-hmm. It is over list, but not as much over list. Patek says, hey, I'm Patek. I'm going to charge you $1 million for it. I'm going to make you buy $1 million worth of stuff prior to that. I'm going to interview you, and maybe then I might sell you one of these watches. If that's not being king, I don't know who is. Yeah. And speaking of kings, imagine Petty King going through that interview process. Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
I'd walk out there with the Patek Philippe magazine.
Probably not even that. You'd probably walk out of there with security. Guys, I wanted to thank everyone for tuning in. Hopefully, we shed a little light as to why some of these things trade at where they are. And again, to sum it all up, it's different reasons, right? You have horology, you have rarity, you have collectability, you have name. There's so many factors that go into why are these watches so expensive that this conversation could technically be endless. And the list of things and aspects that make a watch expensive, 100,000 all the way out to $1.5 million, can go on and on and on. And we can go on and on, but we don't have that kind of time. So guys, like, comment, share, subscribe. Marco, Adrian, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you on the next edition of What's on My Desk.